Content note. The more I study the 20th century, the more I find it's impossible to talk about anything after 1930 without running into actual Nazis. So, trigger warning, I guess? They're only in this one for a few seconds, but any amount of time is too long to have them around. Anyway, with rumors of a big Hollywood strike on the horizon, I thought it would be fun to run through the history of media piracy. I promise it's related, maybe tangentially, but it's all connected in ways I won't even barely scratch the surface of. And here we go. In 1877, somebody, history says Thomas Edison, but I have understandable doubts that it was actually him, accidentally ran a piece of indented tinfoil under a telegraph stylus. This produced what was described as an oddly speech-like noise, leading our mysterious stranger, again, it might be Thomas Edison, but probably not, to experiment with producing the first recorded sounds. Edison evidently recorded himself singing Mary Had a Little Lamb, and the first known musical recording was born. Over the next quarter century, competing modes of recording and playback were patented across the United States, finally achieving a measure of commercial success with Edison's gramophone player and the Columbia Phonograph Company's so-called jukebox. And that's when the fighting started. Up until then, sheet music, those esoteric lines of weird coded little symbols that only people who play jazz and classical music can read, had been the only market for music publication. Faced with the prospect of a suddenly shrinking market share and possible extinction, they panicked and sued record companies for copyright infringement. They maintained that recording written music was a violation of their intellectual property rights. Even worse, the Victor Talking Machine Company, I'm not joking, that was their name, had released the iconic Victrola, a stylish phonograph player small enough to fit in your living room. So, sheet music won that fight. Sort of. They got to keep their publishing rights, and that word publishing gained new meaning to become part of a system of monetizing recorded music with the invention of so-called mechanical rights. Mechanical rights refers, as you might expect, to any mechanical performance of a recorded piece of music, whether that's on a wax cylinder, a shellac disc, a vinyl record, or a prehistoric pedal-powered player piano. That gave the burgeoning record industry their own rights over recorded music, and they would pay publishers for the right to record it. The sheet music publishing business has continued to survive so far, since there are still professional musicians, neoclassical composers, and an occasional need to adapt Metallica songs for the San Francisco Symphony Orchestra. Still waiting on that second live album, guys. But the fight did not end there. Less than 50 years after Edison claimed to have invented recorded audio, the Radio Corporation of America was producing the first consumer radios on a mass scale, to the delight of any music fan who didn't want to fill their house with a bunch of shellac discs or wax tubes, and who did not mind the notable drop in sound quality or losing control of what music played when. Having been familiar with the legal ramifications of introducing disruptive technology, record companies proactively pulled the ladder up behind them and added clauses to their contracts that prohibited their artists from working with radio. Because capitalism fosters competition, not legalistic protectionism. Radio and records were now locked in an arms race, and their weapons were convenience, audio fidelity, and contract law. BTL built an electric amplifier which allowed a much wider range of sounds on records, like bass, for instance. Radio fired back with frequency-modulated radio signals, or FM for short, dramatically improving their audio quality. Of course, by then, something had happened that made all of that less relevant. The Great Depression! Now records and radios were luxury items, and fully automated gay space communism was set back like a century or more. Then World War II happened, setting everything back even further. Look, I don't know when you're hearing this. Maybe it's the future now, and all of this capitalism and war stuff sounds really archaic and dumb to you. I hope so. How's the weather these days? It's really hot here in 2021. Hot and scary and windy and damp and frustrating. Anyway, in the post-war detritus of a decimated Deutschland, 3 American soldiers found a piece of technology that represented the only good idea any Nazi ever had: magnetic audio tape. And that is the only good idea a Nazi ever had, okay? Heidegger stands can fuck off, nobody likes you.
This is incorrect. Magnetic audio tape was not invented by Nazis. They never make Anything good. The only reason people think Nazi scientists invented magnetic tape is because nobody was interested in it until some loud, angry incel from Braunau wanted to record his speeches, and magnetic tape was an easy and convenient means to that end.
It's true. Tankenstein has ruined the big reveal for anyone who was furiously typing an angry comment about it just now. Nazis were not tech wizards. They were unimaginative, silly, petty-minded dipshits, and the only thing they ever invented was a series of boring excuses for how much they suck. Checkmate, dorks. So anyway, magnetic audio tape was actually invented in 1927 and patented in 1928 by Fritz Fleumer, an Austrian engineer whose job was making cigarette filters look shiny. He adapted his process to bind iron oxide powder to a strip of paper for recording audio, and 5 years later, Edward Schiller invented the ring-shaped recording head. Together, these two geniuses inadvertently set the stage for a big kerfuffle in the 1970s and 80s when this technology landed in the hands of teenagers who wanted to share awesome music.
Hold on, so all of this was a lead-up to a video about music piracy?
Kind of. What have you been up to while I was off?
Nothing interesting. Had to cancel the trip to New Zealand. Went to Bolivia instead.
Okay, I have some questions for later, but you went to Bolivia in 2021 and it was nothing interesting?
Correct. There is nothing to discuss.
Okay.
So we are talking about music piracy this time.
Yes and no. Music piracy is a small but key piece of a larger puzzle.
Oh, good. For a moment, I thought this video might be concise.
Yeah, I'm sorry to tell you it is not. It's probably just going to be this awful mess of copyright law, bad media, industrial noise, rock stars, federal law enforcement agencies, the works. Even ICE makes an appearance.
Well, in that case, I will stay.
There won't be any actual ICE agents coming around, dude.
Fine. I will go out for lunch then. Do you want anything?
I'm good, man. Thanks for asking, I think. Oh, please don't kill anyone. Shit. All right, let's get started. Greetings, aspiring heroes. I'm the Silver Samaritan, and today we're finally getting to that promised video about media piracy. As some of you know, I had a bit of a health crisis last month. No big deal. All I can tell you is a chrome bikini is insufficient armor against mental illness. But we're all here now, so moving on. I'd like to start by expressing my hope that most people know the difference between a historian and a semi-retired vigilante who did, at most, a couple weeks' worth of research on something to make a cartoon about it. Just wanted to start there for no particular reason. So when I was a kid, media technology was still mostly analog. Digital recording existed, but nobody wanted it, mostly because it cost a literal fortune and didn't actually look or sound very good yet. Instead, most households of median to higher incomes had analog stereo systems that usually included an amplifier, record player, radio, auxiliary inputs that nobody knew what to do with, and the important part here, a cassette tape player. With the evolution of tape decks into the Walkman personal player and replacing 8-tracks in car stereos, people wanted more of their music on cassette. A lot of these people already had large collections of music on vinyl, which, if you can believe it, was still widely available, brand new, in stores. I have memories of seeing things like Billy Idol and Madonna records in department stores. It was a completely different world. Now, people weren't about to go out and buy all these albums again on cassette if another option was available. And it was. It was childishly easy to just buy blank cassettes and tape the albums. If you don't know what blank cassettes were, they were like CDRs, except they looked like little Nintendo cartridges with wheels inside them. Or if you're Gen Z, they were like iPhones that only held like 30 songs and did nothing else, and you had to put them into another machine to make them work. This is a bad analogy. Look, you've probably already Googled it by now and found a better explanation. I'm moving on. The point is, people recorded their vinyl records onto cassettes. So, For a lot of young people, access to new music was restricted. Somewhere between parental authority, lack of available variety, and being broke all the time, we figured out that you could borrow tapes from your friends and copy the best songs onto 90-minute Memorex cassettes. We didn't call it piracy, we called it mixtapes. DJs had been doing this for a while already, selling mixtapes of their live sets, and they did it with much greater art and skill than I ever did, but I also made some pretty decent mixtapes if you weren't picky about beat matching and crossover and genre and flow. By the time I was aware of anything at all, this battle had been kind of fought to a draw already. You probably know about the legal battles over the first hip-hop records. Court cases continue to this day. For example, Beastie Boy Adam Yauch, rest in power, has been gone for nearly a decade, but there are still intellectual property cases being fought over samples used on the landmark album Paul's Boutique, which was released in 1989. Holy cow, I'm old. One of those cases was launched the day before Yauch died in 2012. The first rap record ever released was hit with a copyright lawsuit, even though the quote-unquote sample was actually played live by musicians in the studio, specifically to avoid that problem. This has mostly been ironed out now into a workable system. Sampling is a mainstream practice, and there are various licensing fees paid for samples depending on how they're used. Dr. Dre famously saved Death Row Records untold fortunes by virtue of the fact that he can play just about anything on a keyboard or hire musicians for what he can't play. So the label only had to pay publishing fees rather than the relatively exorbitant mechanical fees paid for sampling the same music. But back to mixtapes in the 70s and 80s. Well, eventually these mixtapes got the attention of record companies. And as you know, record companies do not care whether you're a locally famous Bronx DJ, a laid-off factory worker in Sheffield, or a broke 12-year-old in Nebraska. They want that money. Now, I don't remember stories about major labels or multi-platinum selling artists suing broke teenagers over a Memorex tape in their Walkman. That kind of cruelty would have to wait until the late 1990s. What I do remember is an embarrassing public awareness campaign around music piracy, as if poor kids living in remote areas were an existential threat to the livelihoods of tax-dodging multimillionaires with 3 homes each. This carried over into the digital age. First, CDs were produced with digital rights management software, or DRM, that made it impossible to transfer the content from CD to early digital devices, like desktop computers, for instance, where more and more people were opting to store their music for convenient access and, not fill their homes up with a bunch of plastic. This was a naked attempt to force music fans to buy all the records they owned again. And with 1998's Digital Millennium Copyright Act, it became a crime to tamper with DRM. If your record collection was only playable on an obsolete device, you had to buy it all over again.
That sounds vaguely conspiratorial.
Well, I mean, where's the line between an opportunistic, industry-wide exploitation of new technology and a conspiracy against the public?
Those are basically the same thing.
Maybe. Anyway, it's now early 1999. On the downside, there are a number of strange and horrifyingly portentous disasters just behind the horizon. And on the upside, Napster and a little movie called The Matrix are also about to disrupt some conversations about business as usual. Enter Sean Fanning and Sean Parker, a couple of computer nerds with a dream and access to some private resources. My understanding of the situation is that Fanning had this fever dream idea that peer-to-peer sharing over the internet would be a perfect way for music fans to build a community based on mutual love for the art form. One side benefit of a system like that would be to expand the market reach for artists. He was right. After Napster took off, people who downloaded music illegally through the free service were statistically more likely to buy music after they'd heard it. Free access to music for download did not diminish music sales, it boosted them. Boosting records boosted sales. Third Base should have had a song about that. Unfortunately, large media corporations like Sony and Universal thought differently, in part because they operate with the extremely short-term goal of raking in as much money as possible right now, damn the consequences to anybody, including themselves. I really don't want to get into the tangled mess of litigation that went down, but even if you're too young to remember, you probably know about the PSAs and statements from dad rockers like Metallica and future billionaires like Dr. Dre Dre, and a few kids got their asses sued off too. But piracy did not end with music. Computers don't care if a digital file is a song or a movie or a compilation of state secrets, but I feel like that might be something for another video. If you had time to wait for your dial-up modem to download a movie, you were just a few years away from getting a personal letter from the Walt Disney Corporation demanding that you pay them a fine.
Those were not real.
What's that?
Those letters were phishing scams.
Wow. Well, good thing I didn't pay them then. So the early 2000s became this transitional phase, and in so many ways. Mainstream music became this weird soup of nu metal, R&B rooted hip-hop, lounge, swing, big band rock and roll, breakbeats, Europop, and whatever these guys were. At the same time, music marketing was in crisis. Think of the sheet music crisis 100 years before, but ramped up because the internet. You had established artists like Metallica still fighting for control over who gets to hear their music when and how, while Public Enemy's Chuck D was insisting that evolution was inevitable and that the first person to standardize digital distribution for sale would take over the industry. Well, I guess Apple was listening. If you're sentient today, you probably know what happened there. Quick summary: Apple took over distribution for the music industry.
Well, don't forget about the Pirate
Yeah,
Bay.
I know. It's the part everybody's been waiting for, right?
I mean, the part I am waiting for is the part where multinational corporations are seized and controlled by the workers who currently produce and distribute everything while being robbed of their wages and alienated from their work.
But
this video is about history, not the inevitable future.
exactly, sure, let's go with that. So anyway, in 2003, a Swedish think tank called, and I'm definitely going to pronounce this wrong, Piratbyrån, I think that, yeah, launched a website utilizing P2P file sharing. Users could search, download, and link to torrent files. You know it as the Pirate Bay. The site's growing popularity led to conversations about the meaning of intellectual property rights in the digital age, the future of legal file sharing, and how everybody had forgotten that pirates are fucking awesome. Well, okay, so not everybody was talking about that last part. Maybe it was just me. 2009 was kind of a big year for intellectual property rights. While the Pirate Bay's founders were being sentenced to a year each in prison and a heavy fine for enabling the infringement of copyright laws, a relatively young American government agency called ICE, short for We Wanted a Cool-Sounding Acronym, were shutting down websites suspected of doing basically what the Pirate Bay had been doing. Like, ICE has obviously ratcheted up the evil more recently, so it's easy to forget that people were legitimately really mad at them in 2009 for seizing file-sharing sites. Like I said, things were a bit different.
Imagine if ICE had been abolished 12 years ago.
Yeah, I know. It would be great, can't lie. Only good things could have resulted from abolishing ICE in its infancy. But
it didn't happen. It still should.
yeah, abolish ICE. Today, it's a good day for ICE to go away forever. Also, it scares me a little how much I'm agreeing with you these days. Anyway, the Pirate Bay is still somehow around, from hiding their servers in the offices of a political party in Sweden to mirror sites popping up 3 at a time for every site that gets seized and shut down. It's like Carmen Sandiego if she was a virus. But this stopped functionally mattering because a mail-order DVD rental service and some gold-digging 49er named Daniel Ek decided to reinvent, respectively, TV and radio. As with Apple's iTunes back in the 2000s, somebody arrived at the idea that piracy would be irrelevant if it were possible to subscribe to a single streaming service that provided affordable, unlimited access to quality-controlled media.
Or if a creator-owned co-op were established to distribute media content worldwide with equitable distribution of revenue for said creators.
Maybe, but that is not what happened. No, they did the capitalism thing. And it worked. For a while, Spotify is currently still the #1 subscription-based internet music service, and they do podcasts too if you're into that. And Daniel Ek is of course a billionaire as a result. Netflix is still the Coca-Cola of streaming services, even if the company's net worth is technically a bottomless pit they keep trying to fill with debt. People tell me that's how money works. I can't make sense of it. For a while, it seemed like these businesses had piracy on the decline, and that's when the fighting started. Again. Ever since Daniel Ek built an empire on not paying artists and developers to make him rich, everybody from Apple to Jay-Z have been trying to do the same thing. And ever since Netflix became the go-to name for streaming movies and, chilling. Everybody from Disney to Amazon to the guys who created The Last Airbender have been trying to outdo them at their own game. This has led to a glut of services, all charging ever-increasing fees for access to disparate content. Add to this the complication of licensing content in various countries, and you get that whole thing where Netflix tried to punish users for having VPNs to watch their favorite shows, which ended in the service hemorrhaging customer loyalty in favor of piracy.
Do not forget the workers.
What?
Many of these companies are producing their own content and paying contracted production teams starvation wages to cut costs.
Great. Yeah, that's not good. And it kind of ties into what I was about to say, which is that people are looking at their bills and saying, screw this, I'm just going to watch my favorite shows on cartoonstream.com or wherever you do that. I don't fucking know.
Consider also that the untenable situation faced by media tech contractors is reflective of the larger context. Workers in general are working longer hours with fewer benefits for less and less money. They have less time, energy, and money to spend on goods, services, and media. You mentioned Amazon's streaming service. The same company's distribution centers have been repeatedly criticized for cutting essential costs while putting impossible expectations of productivity on employees and contractors. This has led to health and safety hazards ranging from exhaustion and COVID-19 exposure to people being crushed under falling merchandise, forklifts, and delivery devices. Many of the so-called cast members who work as entertainers in Disney's parks live in their cars. Google's YouTube extracts billions in advertising while continuing to diminish the perceived labor value of those who create and produce at their own expense all of YouTube's content.
Right? Tell me all about that.
No, I was done.
Come on, man, say the thing.
I do not want to.
Yes, you do.
Fine. Eat the rich.
Yay! So piracy of any kind is still technically a crime. While it's unlikely that you'll face jail time or big fines for watching Rick and Morty on cartoonstream.com or whatever, you may still end up losing your internet access for a while, which is bad. And if you create a music sharing platform out of pure love and the desire to build community around the art form, you will probably get shut down and sued into oblivion, because capitalism fosters innovation, not turgidly entrenched power. Incidentally, I don't think Netflix is punishing VPN users by suspending service anymore, but they have gotten pretty good at noticing when you have one and just not letting you connect until you turn it off. That said, if there's a VPN service out there who has mastered the art of fooling Netflix and wants to sponsor this channel, I will absolutely reverse that statement. Incidentally, I guess, at time of recording, the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees, Moving Picture Technicians, Artists, and Allied Crafts of the United States, or YATSE for short, aka Hollywood's labor union, they're teetering on the edge of a strike. As Tankenstein pointed out, people working for these streaming services on original content are being paid less and less for more and more work. Not just contractors, but employees are apparently working 12-hour days without breaks, and Apple TV in particular wants a discount price on labor because one of the richest corporations on earth can't take a loss while carving out their spot in an established market that someone else built. Ironic that a company whose value was calculated last year at $612 billion cannot afford a loan for some fucking bootstraps. I don't ever want to hear a CEO say that you need to pay for talent again, at least not until they've actually backed up that statement by, paying their workers and following labor laws. I also unequivocally do not recommend downloading or streaming anything illegally during or after any strike that may or may not occur. However, I do recommend that you like and subscribe if you liked the video and want to see more. Don't like it? Break my heart and give it a thumbs down. Got a comment or correction? There's a comments section for that. Keep it civil or I will destroy you. I'm kidding. I'll just delete the comment and ban you. I'm not the tone police, but I won't tolerate any bullshit. And as usual, you can find me on these platforms. Links are in the description below, along with links to Sigmund Floyd, who does all my music and who I hear may have a new project of some kind in the early stages. I'll let you know. Thank you again to Tankenstein. Your insights are always fascinating and helpful. And big thanks once again to my sponsors. If you would like to materially support me and get your name here along with these wonderful humans, mostly humans, I'm pretty sure, the links to my Patreon and Ko-fi are below. You get to see videos a couple days early before they go public, along with some other, perks. My AMA thing is still really disorganized. Basically, you just hit me up on whatever platform you like best. If that gets out of hand, I'll figure it out. Join me again next time. If I'm feeling strong and confident, we're gonna talk about espionage. I actually wanted to have that as part of this video because the line between contemporary espionage and digital piracy is not blurry, but I think there's a certain overlap there that might be worth exploring. But the script was already running too long, and espionage really does deserve to be its own video. No promises this time, though. As I alluded to earlier, I had a mental health crisis recently that set this video back a month. If that happens again, you may end up with something completely unrelated. Or nothing. Who knows? Life is crazy. Until next time, this is the Silver Samaritan saying good luck and stay safe.